An investigation by DW's investigative team has found that the Myanmar army is brainwashing its soldiers and controlling every aspect of their life, even down to their finances. My colleague spoke to 3 defectors, 2 of whom are high-ranking officers. The conversations were mainly over messaging apps and through some audio and video calls. I'll be speaking to one of my colleagues who conducted the investigation in a minute, but here is a bit of what 2 of the defectors said. Everything is monitored. They want to turn people into robots who don't think for themselves. And another defector said, if people post political things, they can be arrested and put in jail for 3 or 4 weeks. And joining me on the line is my colleague Naomi Conrad, who was part of the team that conducted this investigation. Naomi, where are these defectors you spoke to and why did they defect?
Right, so I'm afraid I can't tell you very much about where they are exactly because obviously they're not safe and the army is hunting down, as far as we know, defectors. All I can tell you is that 2 are in hiding in Myanmar. They're moving from one safe house to the next every day. Another one is across the border in India, but again, I can't tell you where exactly. All 3 men decided to defect following the army takeover earlier this year under what is basically a brutal crackdown on civilians protesting this takeover. One man said, I can't be part of an institution that took part in an illegal coup. So very much because of the coup, they all defected.
Did they provide any explanation as to why the army decided to take power in this manner in Myanmar?
So none of these men are actually part of the highest echelons of the army, but they're all very clear that they think the coup took place because the army was afraid that it was losing power. So the elections late last year saw a landslide for the governing National League for Democracy, which basically meant that, the army was afraid it might lose its grip on power. And one man was pretty clear. He said, the army wants to turn the entire country into a military base, meaning that, the army wants to take control of the whole country and not cede any power to elected civilians or elected politicians.
Naomi, how is the army able to wield so much influence in Myanmar?
So the army in Myanmar is basically a very powerful state within the Myanmar state. If we look very briefly at the history of Myanmar, basically Myanmar has been governed by the military for most of its recent history since it gained independence from the UK, from Britain, basically. And in that time, the army managed to amass great wealth, so land, economic and financial power. For a long time, it was basically impossible to do business in Myanmar without going through the army or affiliated businesses of the army. And what they've also done is, establish their own court system. They're not accountable to the civilian courts. They run their own universities. So a very powerful yet very opaque state within the state that's basically accountable to no one.
What did these defectors tell you? Did they provide a glimpse into the life of an average soldier in Myanmar? They did.
And it's a very cloistered, a very strictly monitored life. I mean, they were very clear that the army has a Facebook monitoring team that, looks at all their social media activity and also hauls people in that, maybe voice their support for the National League for Democracy or criticize the government. There's also a lot of propaganda. Officers have to take part in a 3-month training course, which, paints the army as the savior, as the defender of Myanmar against the Muslims. There's a lot of anti-Muslim rhetoric that soldiers are fed. The 3 men that we talked to, they didn't necessarily believe all this propaganda, but they knew well enough that they couldn't voice any criticism because that would have been dangerous. And also right now, soldiers are basically living this life on the base that they're not allowed to leave. They need to ask their superiors if they want to leave. They have to do all their shopping on the bases, their schools on the bases. So I think an average soldier, you could say, has very little to no contact with civilians.
You did mention earlier that these 3 defectors are in a dangerous situation, but for the moment being, are they safe?
I wouldn't say they're safe. So it seems pretty clear that the army has drawn up a list of wanted activists and journalists, and also of defectors. And they haven't published this because it's obviously embarrassing for them to publish how many people have left the army despite the great danger. But they're hunting down these people. They're also putting a lot of pressure on the defectors' families. I mean, one man told us that his parents received threatening phone calls basically telling them, where's your son? If you don't tell us where your son is, then we'll come and get you, at which point he severed all communication with his family. So they're in a very dangerous situation. They're trying to leave the country, but they know that even if they make it to Thailand or to India, they're not necessarily safe there. I mean, they could also get deported back. It's a very complex situation at the moment. They don't really know how to stay safe other than, move from one safe house to the next. They've obviously thrown away the phones they had when they were still on the military base, but it's dangerous and they're trying to remain safe.
Naomi Conrad, thank you very much for your reporting.